All right, welcome back to the podcast. I am joined today with Kevin Foss. He is an OCD expert. He is a clinician in practice. And today we are going to be talking about something called Real Event OCD. This is when the past becomes a source of obsession. This is when uh, someone with OCD, or some people I imagine with OCD, really just have a lot of this, and maybe they don't have a lot of the normal hand washing, contamination fears. But let's start it off. Kevin, tell us a little bit about Real Event OCD. Let's just launch into it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me on. Um, all right. So, yeah, you gave a really good snapshot of what that is. So, real event OCD is it's a subtype of obsessive compulsive disorder, and we call it real event. There aren't different diagnoses. It's not like a whole separate thing from, as you mentioned, contamination. It's just another way that it manifests, and it's kind of a colloquial way for us to get a quick shorthand to what the types of obsessions are, the general themes that someone is struggling with. So, real event, as you said, it's going to be focused on something that actually did, in fact, happen. Whereas, we contrast that with a lot of the other subtypes, they're related to things that could happen, that might happen, that if I do this or if I don't do that, then I'm going to experience some calamity or something I don't want. Whereas with real event, the obsession is about something that did happen, and then a lot of the rumination is going to be about what effect that's going to have on the future, whether or not those values are, or like what value was broken, how do I atone for it, what sort of punishment should I accept or get, and or the compulsion has to do with trying to eliminate a sense of guilt and a sense of shame related to it.
Okay, so you have a real event, then you have these obsessions, which are unwanted thoughts, distressing thoughts. Um, Sometimes it's like what really happened, but then sometimes they're questioning. I've had a couple patients who question if what happened, if more happened, like if they're forgetting some details that maybe
Mhm.
like um just getting real, like if they're having thoughts like, oh, did I hurt that child, when I interacted with my cousin? Maybe they didn't really hurt the child at all. They didn't touch the child, but they're fearing these thoughts, these obsessions. Is that what we're talking about, or is it how would you kind of add to that?
As we're talking about these subtypes, right? At the end of the day, it's all OCD, right? So it's all, an obsessive thought, a what if question, right? What if then type of proposition, which leads into a sense of anxiety, discomfort, fear, numbness, terror, whatever you want to call it, an unwanted feeling state, followed by a compulsion to try to undo that feeling or to try to make sure that whatever you're afraid of, whatever that feared story is, never comes to fruition. So there are going to be some disagreements and some nuances to what fits under this title of real event. And some people will kind of put it into that category of imagining what else could have happened. But regardless of all that, yes. So to answer your more direct question, that fear of one of the compulsions that someone might do would be to go back in time in their memory and to try to figure out if something else happened, right? They might recognize, all right, I did hang out with my cousin or whoever it might be. There could be an imagined story of, well, did I do this, right? I think what you're kind of alluding to also is there can be a false memory OCD, which is often attached to real event OCD. Real event again is going to be, all right, I know that I hung out with my cousin and um, you know, I hung out with my cousin that day, right? False memory OCD can kind of come in and suggest, well, maybe you're not remembering everything correctly. Maybe you did something else. Maybe something else happened that, would violate would violate some sort of value that you have, right? You did something wrong. So in that, a lot of compulsions are going to be, uh, playing that story over and over and over again to try to figure out, was there something else that happened? If I did this, they might have done this. They made this facial expression. I wonder what that means, right? Playing all these out to try to get to a point of confirmation that nothing happened, or get to this place of confirmation that something did happen so that they can take action on it, right? Some of the stuff that I would categorize as really clearly under real event would be things like a memory about maybe cheating on a test in high school.
Mm. Okay.
They have that memory, like, I did cheat on that test. I know I did, right? And
Hmm.
I know it's wrong. I made that choice. But then the rumination might be about, well, if I cheated on that test, and then if I didn't get that actual grade, gosh, maybe I wouldn't have gotten into the college that I got into. And gosh, if I didn't get into that college, maybe I wouldn't have gotten that career that I now have. So, you know, the long-term impacts of that can just go and go and go. So,
Mm.
so that compulsion might be, well, I have to go back and, see if I can find that same test. Like, if I could prove to myself that I did know all the information on that test without cheating, well, I can feel better that, getting into that college was justified. Or maybe I can go back to find my teacher and just confess to them and say, hey, I cheated on that test, for them to say, that's okay. You're absolved of this guilt, and you can move on with your life.
Hmm.
So I hope that answers your question, or perhaps it makes it a little bit more muddled.
Yeah, and I think it's like, what is normal guilt, regret,
Uh-huh.
versus what is real event OCD? Because I think there are people who do things that are wrong, and they come into my practice and
Hmm.
they grow, a new set of values, or they understand, like, oh, I did that thing and that didn't feel good. And
Hmm.
then it's like, okay, I have a value here that I didn't even know existed, maybe.
Yeah.
And then that leads to more thriving in the future. So that's different than necessarily what we're talking about here. And I think it's important to kind of differentiate the two.
Right. Right. I think I wonder for what you're kind of talking about, and I kind of see some of these folks as well, where they see that they might be you know uh, hung up on something or feel guilty about making a mistake in the past. Um, the difference is going to be with OCD is that there is it's persistent in the sense of guilt. It kind of doesn't let them off the hook a lot of times, right? There can be a sense of, generally speaking, when we see that we've made a mistake, we acknowledge it, we take ownership of it, we try to take some measures to apologize or make atonement for whatever those mistakes are, try to learn from it, and then commit to not doing that or doing something different in the future,
Hmm.
right? Someone with real event OCD, they're going to go through that process, right? But once they get to the end, their brain says, well, you know, but what if it's worse than you actually imagined,
Mm.
right? So then they go back to the beginning of it and then ruminate about it
Yep.
and so on, right? Or it's they've done the process, but that feeling just persists. So now the battle is, well, what do I have to do to get rid of this feeling
Mm.
and get to a sense of confidence and certainty again?
Certainty. Yeah. OCD, one of the things I took away from the Penzel work, episodes.
Yeah,
Penzel, if you haven't listened to those on OCD, he's a leader in the field. I think you respect him quite a bit too, right?
of course.
Um, and so he talked about how OCD is the doubting disease.
Hmm.
The doubting does not stop. And I've seen these patients, they'll spend 4 to 6 hours a day. They'll spend every waking moment going back.
Absolutely.
And that's a huge difference. Like, if you have a patient, or if you yourself are listening to this and you're spending 4 to 6 hours in regret, going back in time,
Hmm.
with a component of doubt, with a component of uncertainty, seeking for certainty, you may have real event OCD. Now, how many of your patients with it have other types of OCD as well, or do you see people with just isolated real event?
Both.
Okay.
So it's we kind of expect, and OCD is kind of tricky in this way, is that it finds its way into a lot of other areas of life, and the real event kind of element of this. Remember, as we talked about, real event is not its own diagnosis, right? It's just OCD. And OCD, as you mentioned from your Pincel episode, it's the doubting disease, right? So there's going to be this kind of sense of doubt, this sense of lack of trust in oneself, lack of abilities to be able to have that sense of confidence and assurance with oneself in these various areas. So you can kind of see a sense of real event OCD showing up in other quote subtypes as well, right?
Hmm.
So, so to that end, yeah, oftentimes there's going to be other subtypes, but it doesn't mean that, if someone has five subtypes or they just are experiencing real event as an isolated obsession, that, that person is, more broken or sicker or whatever verbiage they
Hmm.
might want to use on themselves. What it means is that they have OCD and they are in this pattern of questioning, doubt, reassurance. And what that reassurance does is it goes back and reinforces the idea that I can't trust myself. I did something wrong and bad. And the way to alleviate that bad feeling is by going through this ruminative or reassurance or avoidance or ritual cycle.
Hmm. Yeah, and so reassurance, I think that's an important thing to mention or emphasize. They could ask for reassurance from other people too. So you may not be the one with real event OCD. You may have a loved one who continually seeks reassurance.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And is giving reassurance the best way to help them?
Generally speaking, no. It's kind of a reassurance is kind of a four-letter word around OCD land, as it were. But
That's a very counterintuitive thing, and I think this is why
yeah.
like I usually I'm more psychodynamically oriented, I'm more,
Hmm.
transference focused, I'm more like logotherapy, existential type
Hmm.
stuff. But for OCD, it's like I refer these to my OCD experts. Like
Hmm.
because if I and I've tried working with some of these people and it's like if I'm just using empathy,
Uh-huh.
trying to find the deeper meanings of things,
Yeah.
it can it just they still are obsessing 4 to 6 hours a day, you
It,
know.
exactly. It's counterintuitive because we, as emotional, caring, loving people, we see someone who's in pain, who's obviously struggling with something. We want to do anything that we can to make them feel better, right? And it feels like the right thing to do is to say, like n nothing happened, you're fine, right? You're going to be okay. Like we can just get over this. Like you're a great guy, you're awesome, you're like whatever the verbiage is, right? And as you said, like somebody with real event or, another subtype of OCD, they may be spending 4 or 5 plus hours a day ruminating about something. And so sometimes they'll come to therapy. And if someone isn't really attuned to some of these eccentricities and the uniqueness of cognitive behavioral therapy and exposure and response prevention, they're ultimately now just going to have another hour of ruminating and trying to go deeper and deeper and deeper, which is what they've been doing on their free time already.
Hmm.
Really, what we're trying to get at here is this disconnection from that pattern. And so breaking the cycle of compulsion to then get to a place where we can learn to sit with the feeling of discomfort, of uncertainty, and not to get rid of it, but
Hmm.
instead in a sense, get used to the fact that it's there. And, in the process of doing that, what we often find is the subjective discomfort of that does start to come down, but ultimately through the process of increasing our willingness to simply have discomfort and uncertainty about things that sometimes we're never going to be able to actually get the answer of anyways.
Mm. Okay, so let's rewind a little bit.
Let's
Let's
do that.
rewind. Okay.
Okay.
So I think we just got to be give some examples. Maybe you can give some examples. Um, I think a lot of these things have to do around taboos. And
Hmm.
so in my experience, it could be months before my patient even tells me what's really going on in
Hmm.
terms of the events they're going back to, the things that they're concerned about. How often do you see that? How often do they tell you right off the bat versus they hold it in?
Mhm.
Um, what kind of things are we talking about?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I also want to back up a little bit too, and I do want to answer this question. When we were talking about that, the reassurances that we do, it is important for us, and as a therapist, when someone comes in, I'm not jumping to, hardcore exposure day one. There are some things that we can do, and I think that we'll get to this part about how you can support your loved one without giving inappropriate and unhealthy reassurances, because you can give encouragements and assurances that aren't speaking to the feared narrative, right? So I think that's an important acknowledgement. We're not just saying don't say anything or don't support that person at all. I think there is a way to be encouraging and supportive without feeding into that compulsive cycle. So, um, but now that I sidetracked myself,
Okay, let me go with your sidetrack. I love it.
okay,
Um, so okay, so what is assurance versus what is reassuring,
yeah,
which is part of the compulsion?
yes, yeah, and so when you're in relationship with someone, right, outside of therapy, right, you'll see your family member, your friend, and they're coming up to you and trying to seek quote reassurance, what we'd be calling it, right, and that reassurance can take many different forms. Um, but a lot of times it's speaking to that feeling of, goodness or badness, or is the relationship okay, or did I do something wrong and bad, right? So their question might be about, hey, did I say something yesterday that offended you, right? Well, they're going to come up and say, like, they might not come out and directly say, like, hey, did I say something bad yesterday? Right?
Hmm.
But what they might do is, they'll say, like, they'll just come up and say, like, hey, how are you doing today? And then really spending a lot of time gauging whether or not that person is like upset with them or angry at them, or say, like, hey, are like, hey, are we good, or something like that. Just a simple way to try to get them to say, yes, we're okay, and they extract from that they're fine, their relationship's fine, they didn't do anything bad, right?
Hmm.
When we're talking about assurances, or we're talking about catching those subtle compulsions, um, we're trying to pull back on anything that's going to address that what if, that feared narrative in an inappropriate way, right?
Mm.
And we're not trying to take away that feeling or justify or
Mm.
glorify, in a sense, that doubtful thought. So what that might look like is, instead of talking to the feared story, that narrative, maybe we want to speak more to the feeling itself, right? So we can acknowledge that, hey, that person's in pain, right? So,
Hmm.
the line that I often give to family members and
Mm.
friends in this situation is, if family members coming up and doing something to try to seek reassurance, we kind of catch you. Like, let's say, you were coming up to me and said, hey, you're trying to get some type of reassurance. I'd say, you know what? Like, look, it sounds like you're trying to get a little bit of reassurance right now.
Hmm.
I love you and I support you,
Mm.
but
Thank
I'm
you.
I'm not going to answer that question. Or you
Oh
can,
man.
and it's hard because we could easily say something that would take that away. You can also say, like, hey, it sounds like you're really anxious, but it also sounds like you're trying to get some reassurance. Sounds like you're trying to
Hmm.
get compulsion, right? You can say that's really hard. It sounds like that's really scary. Sounds like that's really uncomfortable, right? But we're not saying anything about the content of the narrative, the content
Right.
of the session.
Yep.
So that would be a kind of a broad difference
Mm.
between assurance and support and the reassurance that would be feeding into the obsession. And different therapists are going to call it different things, but generally reassurance is kind of the, general title that we would give that.
Okay. And then so we're going into I think just to give people an understanding of what are some of the common real event OCD types of obsessions.
Yeah, yeah. So a not as a exhaustive list, because I know that, we're going to go through and kind of name some things, but they'll be like, someone out there is going to say, well, you didn't mention mine. It's not what I have. Maybe I don't. It's again, it's going back into this is all OCD. But
See, you could see how someone would be obsessive about not being on your list, right?
absolutely.
Yeah. And if
Yeah.
you are and you're listening to this, you should probably reach out to Kevin Foss to give you some reassurance that you are indeed on his list.
And I will provide all the reassurance that you want. You can't see me shake my head.
And
Um,
and he'll start to help you as
that,
well. Okay,
all right.
let's go.
So,
Okay.
yeah. So, some of the, some things that, people can experience, it might be like, they looked at, or they maybe have talked to somebody, who, who's not their partner. And then they might go into their head about like, did I flirt with that person? Right? Was I
Mhm.
on the road towards cheating on that person? Right? Or cheating on my partner? Right?
Or
Yeah.
I did, or therefore, I think I did cheat on my
Or
partner.
it did. Yeah, because of that was infidelity, right? So now they might go through an atonement process with their partner and and apologize. And you can see how this would go, right? If they're convinced, right? OCD is saying, "Boy, you cheated on your partner." And they go up to their partner and they say, "Hey, honey, I, looked at that person at the supermarket. I'm so sorry. I really hurt you." The partner might say,
I'm really hurt.
well, they might say I'm really hurt, but they might also go, you looked at a person. Oh, okay. Like that's fine. You looked at it, like, did you have sex with that person? Did you kiss that person? Did you, grab them inappropriately? No, I didn't do any of that stuff.
Hmm.
So you just looked at them. But remember, the guilt in the individual is overwhelming.
The guilt
So
is, yeah, it would be absolutely overwhelming.
absolutely. So even when the partner, again, reassurance, it's fine. I'm fine. We're good. No problem. You would think that would clarify some things, but that doesn't speak to this feeling because now the individual might go in and say, well, maybe I didn't explain it clearly enough, right? Maybe I did do something more, right? Let me now go back into my memory and
Mm,
see if I, did something more than just say hi or just look at this maybe I should go to the supermarket and get their security camera footage just so I can verify that I didn't do anything, right? So you can see where the snowballs, where the reassurance doesn't happen, or the reassurance doesn't ultimately help from the partner. We now need to help this person sit with that discomfort. I mean, we can keep going with this or go through other examples if you'd
I
like.
think we should stay with this one. So how about I be the patient
Okay.
and you be the OCD expert, okay?
Okay.
Um, maybe not. Maybe not. This would be bad. Like, what if my wife listens to this and then what
Uh-huh.
if she hears it, only a clip of it, right? And that could be like really bad.
Are you
So
worried that
now
she's going to take that line out of context and where you're going to have said, I cheated on my wife or I cheated on you, and she's going to hear that?
what if she did, right? What if someone sent her that? You know?
Okay.
Okay, okay. I'm not in person right now. I'm coming out of like the role play.
All right,
It's
fair enough. Oh, boy, I'll tell you, the conversations and the things that I have Googled and the stuff that I have said as an OCD therapist, and then the stuff that I share with my wife it is wild. So it's I kind of say with OCD, anxiety will latch itself onto anything that we can imagine,
right.
but we as humans can imagine quite a bit, right? I'm lucky that my wife is also a therapist. She's a psychologist, so
Okay.
she gets the process.
So okay, with this type of person, because
Yes.
I've seen this type of thing before. I also think they could go back to um confessing, you know. So if they're Catholic, I'm not Catholic, but if they were, they could go to their priest
Hmm.
multiple times, you know, to try to confess the same thing. Uh, I think historically, when I read about scrupulosity,
Yeah.
the tales are like the Catholic priest will eventually say you're not allowed to confess anything twice, you know, it's
Uh-huh.
because they're getting barraged by constant confessing. Or
And
they,
that's Sorry to cut you off. That's a really good example of how these, these subtypes names start to fall apart because in that, it can certainly be seen as real event, but can certainly be seen as religious scrupulosity, right? And the answer is yes, it's both, right? Somebody may have committed a sin, right? What would be a sin in the Catholic Church? So rightly so, they'd be going to their confessor, confessing, and then doing whatever the priest says, right? But
Hmm.
OCD won't let them off the hook just because they did it that one time, right?
Hmm.
So they're going to want to go in. Interestingly enough, religious scrupulosity is one of the first places where OCD was seen because priests would see somebody coming in and confessing the same thing or confessing things
Hmm.
that they might have done, but they didn't actually do.
Yeah, and like I could see them. They've told me they, citing verses like if you look upon a woman with lust, you commit adultery. So
Hmm.
it's like I committed adultery,
Right.
and it's like but the weight of it is that intense guilt to the level as if they did, have the
Right.
affair.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. But again, we're noticing the difference between, the feelings and the reality, right? The feelings in this don't match up to what actually happened or would be typically justified by the infraction, right? Whatever the thing is that was done, right? That anxiety felt so much more intensely and it felt so much more real. Now, the person with OCD, I kind of say like they have these they're of two minds, right? They have their logical, reasonable, rational side, and they have their, anxious side, right?
Mm,
They experience both. There's the insensitive OCD joke.
mm,
It goes like this. What's the difference between someone with OCD and someone who's crazy? The person with OCD knows they're crazy.
mm.
Now, again, I know it
Hmm.
thrown around that word, but these are the words that we use about ourselves sometimes, right?
There's insight into into the reality of the situation. I know
Yes.
because I've treated very, very complex cases of OCD with schizophrenia,
Right.
and sometimes I'm scratching my head. Am I treating the OCD right now, or am I treating the schizophrenia? And in treatment resistant schizophrenia, it's even more complicated because then they're on clozapine, and is the clozapine causing the OCD?
Yeah.
And then, or if the clozapine's too high, they're more obsessive. If the clozapine's too low, they're more psychotic. And so it's kind of like you're kind of in this very difficult balancing act.
Right, right. Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm obsessing about that 4 to 6 hours. No, I'm joking.
I mean, maybe,
Luckily, I'm not
maybe
obsessing
you
4 to 6 hours a day, but it
can.
does tie my brain in knots. Yeah, at
Yeah,
times.
it absolutely can. It's hard because, somebody is, raking themselves over the coals to try to ultimately do the right thing,
Hmm.
right? And it illustrates that they're good people. And that, with Real Event, oftentimes, or sometimes I'll say, they made a mistake. They did something they didn't like. They did something they didn't want to do, or their values changed and they reflect on a time when they did something that was perhaps within their values then, but is now not. And they want to make it right. But in order to do that, they just become overwhelmed with the sense that
Mm.
they are this terrible person, and they're
Hmm.
just overwhelmed by the sense of guilt and the shame related to whatever that thing is. So that compulsive cycle, it being so hard to get through and so hard to fight against, it just feels like it's persisting. Another example could be like, somebody may have made like an offhanded joke years ago, or put up a
Mm.
tweet, years ago, that maybe the culture has changed and now that joke is inappropriate.
Right. And now they're not only have they deleted it, but they also fear that someone took a screenshot before they deleted it.
Yeah, maybe they did, or maybe just yeah, maybe somebody just remembered it, right? And there's no way you can go back and do that. You can go back and find historical, snapshots in time of what the internet looks like. So maybe it exists there.
That's very scary.
And so maybe that tweet is going to resurface. Their boss is going to find it. Their spouse is going to find it. It's going to be released on the news, right? Hey, you know, Dr. Puder said this thing a couple years ago. Boy, how terrible is he, right? So it can be this fear of
And then
ultimate,
everything falls apart.
and then everything falls apart.
Everything falls apart. I'm gonna lose everything.
Yep, probably.
I've had that.
Yeah.
Not with the tweet, but it's like I've had that feeling. I think, but how do we differentiate someone like myself who has had that feeling,
Yeah.
right? Of concern,
Hmm.
uh, to someone who maybe ruminates about it endlessly
Hmm.
and needs like exposure response prevention to really overcome it.
Right. Right.
Yeah, how do you differentiate that?
I think it depends on the severity and, as we say in the DSM, right? It causes marked distress, right? If it's getting to that point where it's causing significant impacts on your emotional well-being, it's impacting your relationships, it's impacting your ability to function in your day-to-day requirements and just your life, right? And it significantly is it's significantly different than, the kind of typical guilt that we all experience. Having lived life, we are all going to do and say things that we maybe later regret, or, sometimes immediately regret. But, you know, we are going to do and say things and make mistakes, right?
Hmm.
But while the rest of us in a typical way, we'd feel that, and we might feel that sense of guilt, that heaviness, and we do our best to apologize or to try to make it right. We can kind of get on with our day without it being wildly impactful on our day to day. Whereas for someone where else it graduates into this sense of diagnostically OCD, right? Now,
Hmm.
fits within that category. This person is now ruminating about this, for an extended period of time. It's causing them extreme or significant emotional distress.
Hmm.
They may be avoiding people, places, other responsibilities that they have,
Hmm.
in service of this feeling, in service of this thought, and this sense of guilt, right?
Okay, but then how? Because I'm thinking of like PTSD, like a trauma like experience could result in rumination, going
Sure.
back to it, nightmares,
Uh,
flashbacks. How is that different than this? Or yeah, how do you differentiate? Like when you're talking to someone, when do you lean more towards like, okay, you had a traumatic experience versus, oh, this kind of seems more like real event OCD.
yeah, no, that's a really good question, and there's going to be there's a lot of overlap between those. And, we kind of, well, I think one of the biggest questions we're going to ask is like, where's the anxiety? And like, what's the anxiety story? What's the compulsive response to it, right? Now, also, I think it's fair to say that OCD treatment and PTSD treatment is kind of going to be a little similar. There's going to be exposure and response prevention involved with both, right? There's going to be an acknowledgement of for PTSD, acknowledgement of the trauma, kind of processing through what, the significance of that for that person. And then also progressively being able to have that thought, have that feeling, or experience that, elements of that event, and try
Hmm.
to work towards kind of tolerating that feeling or being in that, if they're interested in wanting to have those things back in their life, right?
Hmm.
I think, I'm thinking about someone who's like, a veteran who struggles with fireworks,
Yeah.
right? So, they might be practicing exposure and response prevention to loud and sudden sounds.
Hmm.
That does mimic a lot of what we might be doing with OCD. So, I'd say there's going to be a lot of overlap between those two.
That's good. Yeah. I I think of trauma as like some often in the midst of a traumatic scenario, there was an element of dissociation or like this profound near-death experience.
Mm,
Um, Whereas a real event OCD, it could be just things that like more like almost like Moral injury? No, not moral. But see, moral injury is I would put in a separate category as well. I don't know if you've thought about like moral injury. I had a episode on that with a vet talking about like when people go through things that really push them past what they want to do morally.
Hmm.
Like sometimes then they kind of have this different type of trauma that occurs to them, like a moral injury trauma. Um, yeah. Do, do you think do you think in categories of moral injury as well and differentiate that from real event OCD? Because when I think real event OCD, I'm thinking doubting and I'm
Yeah.
thinking going back to the event to try to make sense of it in kind of a more compulsive way and
Yeah.
all the compulsions that follow. And the person is more of an OCD type of person. Like they may have had other obsessions throughout and compulsions throughout their life as well.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're oftentimes going to have other elements as we talked about. But I think you pointed out something really important to this is that there's going to be, more of an emphasis on the impact of that event on other areas of their life. And it's going to kind of be it can kind of go into this extreme sort of bizarre story, right? Of like what's going to be the impact of this one event, right? Going back to like, did I cheat on that test? Right? They recognize that they did cheat on that test, but it's now what is the long-term impact of that? And how do they stop that
Hmm.
thing from happening? Or how do they ultimately just feel better from it, even if it's a temporary
Hmm.
better, right? Temporary relief. So that might be one of those
Okay. And
differences.
and so for the examples that you've given, like going to the supermarket to check the video footage,
Yes.
um, for something like that, does the person, because I could also see that kind of a little bit psychotic, right? Like, does the person, if it was psychotic, the person would be doing it in a sense of there would be no insight that what they're doing is anything like a compulsion.
Right. Right. And that's kind of that, the fixity of beliefs, right? How certain are they in their thought, where it then kind of graduates into a delusion, versus, or do they have that kind of mixed insight where they have that, you remember that logical part of their brain and their fear irrational part of their brain, right?
Hmm.
How much like which side is getting the microphone in their life, right? And is there, if there is too much or there's a significant lack of insight, that's going to be a slightly different approach, right?
Hmm.
It's going to be if there is if someone does have a little bit of insight and can kind of experiment with and play with that idea that, maybe the thought that they have is overblown, is irrational, doesn't make sense, and yet that anxiety is still speaking really loudly that it is vital and important and true, then that's where you can kind of put a wedge in between those two and try to pull the microphone away from that illogical side of their brain and have that rational side speak, even if it's a quiet little voice. But that can help to break down the importance of that story, the rationale of that story, so that perhaps they can practice exposure and response prevention. And it gives them permission to then say, maybe the story isn't correct. So if it's incorrect, if it's inaccurate, well, maybe I don't need to do anything about it. Maybe I don't need to go look into it or keep apologizing for it.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about exposure response prevention. Um, what are some of the go-to things that you usually start someone with?
Exposure and response prevention is going to be part of the gold standard of treatment. It's going to be the main thing that OCD therapists are going to want to do. What we're doing with that is we're progressively getting closer and closer to whatever the fear is, while resisting anything that would undo, neutralize, or help to avoid that feeling, that bad feeling, right? So, when we're working with someone, we're going to first start by building a hierarchy of all the things that trigger their anxiety, right? Situations, places, people, ideas, activities that, tap into that sense of anxiety. And then we're going to rank that from easiest to hardest. And generally speaking, we'd start with the easiest stuff and start exposing them to that and then working their way up. A really basic idea of exposure and response prevention, I think about like maybe a fear of spiders, right?
Okay.
Is like if someone has a fear of spiders, we wouldn't start by getting a tarantula and putting it on their face, right?
You would
Um,
never do that to me, by the way.
challenge accepted. Um, if but so we'd start like we might just start with writing the word spider, right? We might start with just writing the letter S if that is going to be kind of activating. And then again, it's exposure. And the other part, response prevention. The response in this is the compulsion, it's the avoidance, it's the neutralizing behavior. So, we'd write S and then we wouldn't get rid of it, look away from it. We wouldn't try to think about something peaceful and safe. We wouldn't think about squishing a spider. We'd sit with the thought and the feeling, right?
Do you ever
And then
think about having a reality TV show and doing this?
they did. It was called Obsessed.
It's called Obsessed. Oh
Yeah.
man, I
It
just
was
don't watch any TV anymore.
my interestingly my old supervisor was
Oh
on.
really?
Yeah, it was one of the therapists, and they did exactly this. So they helped someone the show, walked them through their process of, through exposure and response prevention.
So
Yeah,
let's
go ahead.
talk about plane flights. Fear of plane flights.
Let's do that.
Let's say they've tried VR, they've
Okay,
tried it's specifically the turbulence is what gets them,
okay,
and the fear of death and going to hell.
sure,
Okay.
makes sense.
So what would you start?
All right. So for anybody out there who has a fear of flying, there's a program called SOAR, SOAR, that is it's a great program specifically designed for fear of flights. But for someone who may not have access to that, again, we're gonna we're if we're just in the response exposure and response prevention phase of treatment, we're going to make that hierarchy of like, what is it about flights that trigger their anxiety, right? Different elements of it, right? So it might be they were going to put down on that list, all right, the turbulence, right? They're going to put down, they're going to put down the thought of dying and going to hell, right? Which is its own whole can of worms, right? They're going to put down all the sounds that they might hear, right? So they're going to put together this whole list, and then we're going to put it in order, and then we're going to start with the easiest stuff, and then start exposing. So like some step in that would likely be, just watching videos of flights.
Hmm.
This would be a relatively easy exposure, right?
Okay.
So we're going to pull up videos on YouTube of airplanes taking off and landing. Totally fine. But in that, it's going to be likely triggering some, emotional anxiety response. And then we're going to turn our attention towards that, make space for it, notice where it is in one's body, and resisting the urge to try to look away from it, to
Uh,
neutralize the feeling. And what we learn is that the subjective discomfort of that will slowly start to come down.
Now, do
As
you do like a with behavioral therapy? My
yeah.
understanding is it's kind of like before you do the experience, it's like, okay, this is what I think is going to happen. Maybe
Hmm.
you write that down, and then you do the experience, and this is what actually happened, and then the discrepancy between them. Do you ever do that sort of thing where you get them to look at the discrepancy before the behavior, after the behavior?
Yeah, there's an approach called the inhibitory learning model, and it has it includes that as well, where you kind of you anticipate what an exposure you're going to be in. You
Okay.
think about what you're likely to feel, what you're going to want to do, and you also identify what compulsions you're going to be avoiding doing, and then you do the exposure, right? And in that model, you're going to kind of look at two things. One is going to be, what was the actual outcome of that exposure? And then through that, as you kind of mentioned, it's, how does that differ from what the feared expectation was?
Hmm.
What was surprising about it? What stuck out? What was in what was different? And then you build on, what can you do differently next time? How can you kind of amp that up or take one step further? The other avenue of that is looking at how, like, were you able to handle the anxiety, just the discomfort in that process, right? So not did the anxiety come down, but were you
Hmm.
able to sit with that discomfort for longer than you imagined it? Sometimes it's, I can't, I can't be in a room with a spider for, more than a minute. So
Hmm.
we go, let's try a minute and 10 seconds.
Hmm.
Right? And what that does is at the end of it, they go, I didn't like, I thought I was going to run out of that room at a minute, but I was in there for a minute and 10. That's amazing, right? Nothing bad happened. It didn't kill you. It didn't bite your eyeballs out, whatever the fear is. Great. But next time, well, let's try a minute and 20. Let's not do
No,
10 seconds.
no, let's talk about the real event OCD though, because I think
Okay.
it's like so we have the idea of the basic, like we're progressively going through more and more distressing higher levels of anxiety
Yeah.
things. So with real event, like what is the list? Is it things that actually happened that we're writing in the list? And you're writing like a hierarchy of the most distressing and least distressing, or
Yeah,
yeah?
that's a great question. So, let's go with let's go with the cheating example. The cheating on the test example, right?
Hmm.
If you want, we can go with the cheating in the supermarket example too. But let's say it's the school, right? So it might be, you could think about somebody might be, anxious or be triggered by things that remind them of that time. It can be things that, locations. It could be the high school. It could be the name of the teacher. It could be the kind of test that they were taking, right? It could be, almost anything with that. And then, if it's, let's say it's the idea of their high school is kind of activating because it kind of brings up
Hmm.
all the this whole story. So we might start by looking at pictures of it online, right? We might move to drawing pictures of it. We might move to I like to do what I call environmental exposures, which is make it so that it's impossible to get away from whatever your fear is. So we're gonna print out pictures of their high school and put it all over their room. It's going to be the home screen on their phone or the background of their computer. So they're going to constantly see it. But
Okay.
as
So
they're yeah,
so if it was this fear
yeah,
of this girl that you met in the supermarket
yeah.
who was very attractive,
Hmm.
you would recommend printing out pictures of her and putting her all around the house.
Possibly, yeah. Like that may be one of those things. If it's seeing this person, or it may be seeing someone like this person, right? You might do that, right? Now, that does get into an ethical question, which we can also talk about with that. But yeah, it might be the supermarket. It might be we're going to go to the supermarket every day, right? Because it's being in that supermarket's going to bring up all that sense
Hmm.
of, anxiety and guilt and all that stuff. Great. So we're going to allow that feeling to be there. Say, this is my alarm system going off and it's too sensitive in this place. So I'm going to
How
walk
do
up
you
the
how do you
aisles.
differentiate like being a stalker, you
Okay.
know,
Yeah.
and printing out pictures of this girl that you got off the video
Uh-huh.
thing
Uh-huh.
versus and going back to the place where you met her just to try to interact with her potentially again as a behavioral experiment
I mean,
to
it's
being like, not a stalker. And
yeah. I'm not here to advise stalking, so no one get any ideas, y'all. But but that is where some of the ethical questions come in when it comes to exposures, right? Are we doing things that are violating someone's rights, violating somebody's autonomy? Are we taking advantage of somebody? Or is the exposure that we're doing hurting somebody anyway? And I'm not here for that, right? There are wild stories out there that you might hear, horror stories of exposure and response prevention. But if it's the idea of a certain person,
yeah, and I'm just I'm being
yeah,
playful, but I think I'm just
I hear you. And these are conversations that are never ending in the OCD community of how far do you go in exposures? I mean, two great examples of this. So I know you're being playful, but for anybody out there who's hearing this who goes, man, I looked on Reddit and people were describing their exposures, and that's crazy. I'm never going to do that. Like examples are, eating Skittles off toilet seats. All right.
okay. That's not
So
too that's not too weird.
that's not too weird for you. This is what Dr. Puder is doing in his free time.
No,
But
not
are
doing that.
okay, so that's something that somebody might read and go, like, that's I'm not doing that, right? But the question is it necessary, right? Is it required to to get success and treatment and freedom from OCD, is that required? Now, another example for religious scrupulosity, I love talking about religious scrupulosity, is that, I've heard examples of people, therapists advising clients tear pages out of their Bibles,
Hmm.
right? If they're fear of blaspheming or offending.
Okay.
Now, as I don't think or no, I don't think I confidently would never advise somebody do that in any faith for any, for any reason. I think that would be a disrespectful move, and I don't think it's necessary for exposures, right? Um, or taking that Bible page and wiping your butt with it, right?
Hmm.
Related stories like that. So there are things that could, like, is it a good exposure? It's a great exposure, but I'll never suggest it.
I think it's culturally insensitive to someone's values, and I think that's where it takes some nuance, right? Like if someone was having scrupulosity for us, but had a spiritual background that I don't have, I'm not going to try to violate
Mhm.
their spirituality.
Yeah.
Um, I think you can work around it, right? That's what you're saying.
Yes, absolutely. And let's go with, maybe somebody, sinned or blasphemed or said something, let's go back to that like tweet, right? They made an inappropriate, joke about, their religion when they weren't actively religious, and now they're more religious. So now that tweet is, a terror in their life, right?
Hmm.
Well, we do have to acknowledge that it was said, right? That we don't, but ultimately we need to first start with cutting down on any of those compulsions that somebody might do to continuously apologize or continuously atone for whatever that thing is that they made a mistake for, right? But as an exposure, I'm not going to then say, all right, as an exposure, all we're doing is active blasphemy, right? We're going to live at the risk of blasphemy, which is what you and I do on a regular basis anyways, and everybody else does. So we're living life as an exposure, but the response prevention is resisting, scrutinizing oneself,
Hmm.
like playing through their whole day. Did I blaspheme? Was this blasphemy?
Right.
Did this qualify as that?
Yep.
Right? So we're
Yep.
resisting those compulsions
So, okay, blasphemy, like give me an appropriate exposure. Let's
for
say the
blasphemy.
patient says, Kevin Foss, I fear that I may have blasphemed God and therefore I've done some unforgivable sin
Mhm.
and therefore I'm going to hell.
Okay. So depending on the place in therapy, like one thing we may do is a script or a cognitive exposure.
Hmm.
So what that is, or it's imaginal exposure, excuse me. What that would be is we're going to write out a story of somebody's worst fear actually happening and actually coming to fruition. And this is something that we use a lot in Real Event OCD to kind of play out this story, right? So we'd be writing a story about somebody blaspheming, somebody blaspheming in one way or another, and then writing out what the consequences and the impact would be. So maybe it is, they said or did something and then they made God upset and that they live their life and maybe they have, subtly bad luck throughout their entire life or, or up to their lightning bolted immediately. But maybe they die and they go to hell and, God specifically says, hey, remember that thing that you did when you were 20? Yeah, it's because of this, right? So we play out that
Hmm.
story and we write that story out. And then we reread and reread and reread that story until the subjective anxiety of that starts to come down. Now, notice in this, we're not saying, God provides forgiveness and recognizes that I make mistakes and I repent for it and everything's fine and I avoid hell, right? In
That's
this,
not what you write out. You don't
that's
write
not
that out.
correct. We are not writing that out in this exposure. We're writing out the worst case scenario because it's going to be activating, right? But we're
Hmm.
also acknowledging it's a story, right? It's playing with that thought that's in your mind and activating that sense of anxiety. We're showing your brain then that you can have this thought. It's a thought about blaspheme. It's not writing a story with, riddled with blasphemy. It's saying, well, maybe I did. And then that is going to likely trigger someone's anxiety. We sit with that feeling, we notice where it is in our body, we make space for it, and over time, our body starts to tolerate that story and kind of becomes bored with it.
Yeah. Okay, but what is the difference between that and someone just on their own going back through the story
Hmm.
and
Right.
seeking for certainty?
Ah, right there. We're not seeking certainty in this story. We're not trying to get comfort. We're not trying to get confidence that we need to do anything about this. We're just simply saying, here's this story, here is this stimulus that's going in my head that activates my sense of anxiety, right? It's I'll put it in let's put it in a different way. What's your favorite food?
Dark chocolate.
In what form?
85% dark chocolate,
Like
single source, single origin,
bar?
bar, yeah.
Okay. Um,
Oh, like with coffee would be the best, like a good Americano.
okay. So let's say you have so I want you to just have that chocolate for every day for every meal for a month. The first couple days are going to be awesome.
Uh-huh.
By day 30, you're like, I just want anything other than my favorite thing, right?
Okay.
We habituate, we tolerate, we habituate to the excitement of that. It's that in reverse, right? It's we're having this story, we're playing it out over and over and over again to the point where eventually our brain starts to become bored with it, and we can get used to almost anything, pretty much anything.
You know what I think about is I think about the men, and it's usually men that have this job that go down into like sewer systems in those suits,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
like literally they can't see
Yep.
because they're surrounded by shit. And
Oh, we can
they,
cuss on this podcast?
yeah, I mean, like
I
once in a
won't.
while, once in a while,
I have a,
once
I won't. Go ahead though.
we're like,
All right, so they're down in the sewer and they're covered in it, and it's
it's
yeah.
like, how do they do that? Because that is like, have you seen videos of guys that do that? And it's just like,
Oh
what?
yeah, yeah,
How is this guy even doing? He's going down there. He's got his wrench. He's gonna
yep,
open up this thing, unclog this thing, or something like that.
yep.
It's like, oh my gosh.
I mean, that's a fantastic example that we can get used to anything. Now, I bet he doesn't say, you know what I love doing? I love crawling down in the sewer and just being covered head to toe in poop. It's my favorite thing that I do. I love it.
No, he would say, I love the paycheck that I get at the end of
Love
the day so I can go home and take care of my family with my paycheck. That's what he
Probably,
would say.
he probably does, right? And he probably would say, and then, by the way, what we're talking about here is actually there's a whole other avenue called the mastery model, which kind of describes this is where we call kind of just gross OCD, where it's not like a feared story, it's just something just feels gross, right? That's a whole another
Hmm.
conversation. But it's kind of this idea that like
Hmm.
we don't love it, but we do it. I mean, as a parent, how many times did you get poop on your hands from your ridiculous pooping child? A lot,
Countless.
countless. And at no point did you say this is great, right? But and if before that, if someone said like, "Hey, by the way, you're going to have a little human and they're going to poop all over you," how do you feel about that? We'd probably go, "I'm against it, not for it," right? But we get used to it, not because,
Yeah.
but through the process of just showing up and doing what you value. You want to care after your child. You do your value. And in the process, you got used to the thing that's bad. I'm in LA. We have traffic all the time.
Mm,
I
I
don't
hate
love
it.
it, but it's part of life. You get used to it, right? You're in Florida. How's the humidity?
You know what I did to overcome this? I
What?
built a sauna
No, you didn't.
and I use the sauna every morning. And so when I get to my lunch break, I actually go outside at noon in Florida all year round,
Okay.
and I sit outside with my lunch and
Okay.
I eat in the heat and I love it. I totally changed my mindset. But it's that I'll tell you what,
Yeah.
the first 10 times I did the sauna was not fun,
No.
but
It,
my body has like adapted.
yeah. That's exactly it, right? So it's so interesting to find that we can get used to so much stuff. And with, in the case of OCD, somebody's terrified of X, Y, or Z, and they can get to that point where kind of like the idea of something. That's going to be terrifying to a lot of people. And the vast majority of folks who, go through treatment, they don't end up loving the thing that they're deathly afraid of initially, but they get to a point where they go, it's just a thing. It's just a thought. And
Hmm.
with Real Event, the idea is we're trying to make space for and learn that we can sit with the uncomfortable emotions, that sense of uncertainty, and instead of engaging with that feared story or the shame, that they can disconnect from that and re-engage with life as best they can in enacting their current and most important values in life. I know that's such a
Hmm.
therapy thing to say, but it's kind of saying, I made this mistake. It's in my past. It sucks. I don't love it. And I'm going to do my best right now to do something different, to be the person I would like to be, and make space for the reality that we're going to make mistakes again because we're human. And that's what we do.
Okay, so here's a question for you. At what point do you say, okay, now I'm going to recommend that this person get on medication? Like you're working with someone, how
Yeah.
often, like what are the markers that you have that this person is going to need medication for a time?
Hmm.
Or what are the like if we're working together with a client,
Yeah.
at what point do you say to me like, "Hey, I think we can go down on the medication?"
Yeah. It's a good question. It's a good question. Well, um, so as I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not going to pretend. I'm not going to. I refer out for that now. Meaning, I don't want to say you need medication because I don't want to make that call and say, "Hey, Kevin, that ridiculous person said I need medication." All right. So getting back to that, um, my markers for that are often going to be, if we're in treatment and we're doing the process and we're working up the hierarchy or we're trying to make some headway, and we just kind of hit this wall or it's they have this overwhelming sense of unwillingness to continue pushing in the process, and I've exhausted every tool and idea that I can think of. I might say, maybe you want to consider medication for this, because for some people that can be the missing puzzle piece in treatment. Now, medication is, there are going to be people who are on medication and still struggling in treatment. There are people who are not on medication and they're thriving and doing great, right? So I don't think it's a magic pill necessarily, but I also think it's one of the tools in our toolbox. So when someone gets to that point where it feels like we're you just beating our head against the wall and not making a whole lot of progress, I might encourage them to go chat with their psychiatrist about
Hmm.
looking at medication. And then, so your other question is when they come down. So if they're on medication and we're doing treatment and they're doing really, really well,
Hmm.
we're kind of getting to the tail end of their hierarchy.
Yeah.
We might talk about like pulling down on medication, right? So they can make a choice, right? It's up to them. If they want to stay on medication because they say, gosh, my life is just more functional and better on medication. Great.
Yeah.
Live your dream. But if they say my ultimate goal is to get off this medication, then under the guidance of their psychiatrist, they're going to pull it down a little bit, and we're going to keep doing treatment. We're going to keep doing exposures because that anxiety might now be a little bit higher, right? So we want to continue reinforcing what they've been doing as they've
Hmm.
been on medication and showing themselves, yes, I can still do this thing, though it might feel a little bit uncomfortable. I can still do it. And then it comes down, we still do exposures to the point where, the goal would be to be off medication, showing themselves that they can still engage their life, resist their compulsions, and tolerate uncertainty without medication. That would be kind of the arc of that.
Great. Okay, we're gonna wrap it up because I'm gonna get to dinner here with my kids. Any any kind of final thoughts? Any things that you didn't say that you'd want to say?
Oh boy.
I know we could have covered a lot more. We could probably keep going for another 3 hours.
We probably could. I mean, I know I didn't talk a lot about kind of the process of shame and guilt. And we see a lot of that. Shame being that bad feeling when we've done something bad, shame being that bad feeling when we are something bad.
Guilt, I've done something bad. Shame, I am bad. Is that how
Yeah,
you see it?
yeah, it's this
Okay.
like this core sense of self. What I for that, just very briefly, is I try to encourage folks to shift their shame language to guilt language, right? So their shame language is I'm ruined, I'm screwed, I'm bad, right? Instead, we want to talk about guilt as, all right, I acknowledge that I didn't do something that's within my value system. I made a mistake. and I'm going to own it. I'm going to make atonement for it if possible, if reasonable. And then instead of beating myself up and continuing in this cycle of disengagement and shame and isolation,
Yep.
instead I'm going to go and pursue life and try to make a different choice in a similar situation in the future. So I'd encourage folks out there, you know, if they're experiencing real event OCD, boy, go chat with an OCD therapist, talk about what's been going on, and there's recovery to be found in this process, and getting your head out of the past and starting to live your life in the present.
Yep. And I think my final word would be, um, if you have a patient that's not getting better, that's ruminating 4 to 6 hours a day,
Hmm.
and you feel stuck, and you could be trying things that have worked for most of your clients, but unless you get some specialized training,
Hmm.
exposure response prevention, send them to a specialist. I think these are the clients that if you decide not to treat these clients, that's fine. But learn how to refer, find someone in your area. I have a couple. I have Kevin Foss is one of them. LA
Uh,
area, where
LA, Orange County, yeah.
LA, Orange County, California. Where else do you have a license?
Montana, and I can meet with folks online in Florida.
Okay. And do you do any like coaching as well? Like if someone from another country was like a clinician and they wanted to learn more about this.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I also have a podcast where the focus of it is a question and answer based. It's question and answer based. So folks message me questions about OCD and anxiety disorders, and I yammer on about it for about a half an hour or so.
Awesome. I would love to come on sometime.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and we'll leave it there for now.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on.